Supervisors Network. I think most of you have been here before, but if this is your first time, Lily and I started this network 5 years ago, and we meet once a month, and we have guests, coach supervisors from all over the world talking about their experiences. And today we're very lucky to have with us Kathryn Downing. She's one of the pioneers of coaching supervision in the Americas, and particularly her research has been on group virtual coaching supervision. So we're looking forward to learn about your PhD in coaching supervision. Is that correct?
It is, yep.
I think it's the first person that I know that has a PhD on that field. So it's looking forward to learning about your research. Great to have you here with us. And I don't know, what would you like people to know about you? People have read already your bio. We sent it to them with invitation today. But is there anything that maybe is not there that you want people to know?
No, I think it'll just come out as we talk and have this conversation this morning. I guess the only thing to share is that I have 28 young people in my life. And so I love that aspect of being grandma, great grandma, and confidant. So yeah, it gives me good experience for group.
So I'm going to ask everybody to mute yourself, please. I would really appreciate that so we don't have any background noise. And Kathryn, do you need anything from us? You're already the co-host.
Damien, are you going to stay on the call? Because if you are, it would be lovely to have you. We'll pop in maybe to 3 small breakout sessions, just randomly. That would be great.
Okay,
and I'll give you a
help you with that. Okay, we'll help you with that. Yes.
We'll see how. Yeah, good. Well, Damien and Lily, thank you very much for this invitation. I am excited to share always what I found. And Michelle posted on my LinkedIn the other day a reference to the 12 doctorates that exist in coaching supervision already. And I don't know, based on the dates, whether I'm 10th, 11th, or 12th, it doesn't matter to me. I was just really, really happy to have this opportunity to do the research. So I'm going to bounce in and out of PowerPoint and really welcome an open dialogue, whether you want to pop in and add your voice or whether you want to pop something in the chat. And I talked to Lily about the timing. We're going to try to end between 5 and 10 minutes after the top of the next hour so that there's some housekeeping for her to do, and then she has a group starting. So we'll end about in that time frame, give or take a minute. Yeah, so I'm just delighted to be here. For those of you who don't know, I'm based in Santa Barbara, California. And I saw somebody waving and I got all excited about Santa Barbara. Thank you, Cookie. So yeah, it's just lovely to be here. And I think about supervision space. And as I talk about it, a couple of things you may want to know. I have never run a regular group in person. Almost all of my work is virtual. And so it'll be interesting for those of you who have been as a supervisee or as a supervisor in person to compare and contrast what I'm sharing versus virtual. And the other thing to know as I share this is overwhelmingly my practice is small group. I have had through my many years as a supervisor, a handful of one-on-one supervisees. So again, there, just in terms of a reference, as you hear me speak, it's from that perspective, virtual small group. And you'll be able to draw a contrast with your own in-person or one-on-one experiences much more than I will be able to share those with you. So let me go to the PowerPoint and see if we might start there. I would love to get all of your voices in the room, but because we're running on a short time frame this morning, I'm gonna not do that with apologies. So a couple of things. This is just intended as an offering. I'm not advocating. I don't have a particular point of view on whether any of this will make sense to you. I want to talk about whether it does or not, what resonates and doesn't resonate. But it's just the beginning of a dialogue. And this is the quote. Let me see if I can move. This is the quote I live in. It's from Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, who's a medical doctor in the US, but writes some beautiful books. And to me, this is a lot about what we do as supervisors and researchers and observers of our practice, and with our supervisees in observing their practice. So my research, so this began in 2014 when I started my supervision training as a supervisor. I kept reading there's very little evidence base for executive coaching and even less for coaching supervision. So I sort of got intrigued, I got the bug, and I enrolled to start my doctorate in 2016. It is qualitative research. So what that means, of course, is this is what happened in this research. And it's just what happened. It's not, as I said, a model or not. It was based on 5 groups, 5 small virtual groups based in North America, and all from the same coaching certification school. So again, as you think about what I'm sharing, that's a limitation. And the groups had been together. There was a group that came together of experienced coaches who had never been in supervision before, and there was a group that had been in supervision for 6 to 7 years, depending on whose memory. And the data that was collected included the actual supervision sessions of the 2 groups that I supervised. And then journal entries following supervision from all 5 groups, 3 of which were supervised by colleagues. And then I did 4 meetings with each of the 5 groups to understand and consider what was going on. And I used a narrative construct, so it was a narrative inquiry and then narrative analysis. The thesis will be posted soon to Middlesex University's site. It's not quite up yet. And I'll send the site out if you want to it when it is. There's a number of findings and focus, but the main inquiry was, what are the qualities and conditions that enable self-disclosure, reflection, and learning in virtual small groups? So the title of the thesis is Creating the Container for Reflective Practice in Virtual Small Group Coaching Supervision. I'm going to pull a piece of that this morning and focus on the 3 primary roles of the supervisor that popped from the research. The first is leader, which is about the relationships. The second is facilitator, of course, about how we organize and co-create and work with the group. And then the third is the guardian of reflective practice. So I'm going to go through these and I'll pause at each one so we can have a beginning dialogue. What was true and has been talked about in the supervision literature out of clinical settings, clinical psychology settings, is that the relationship is the most important, that the leadership of the group, the relationships among the groups is the most important. And I doubt that that surprises any of us, right? Without that relational presence, without that ability to be in relationship. The thing that's kind of interesting that is most of the literature on supervisory relationships writes about the supervisory relationship, singular, between the supervisor and the supervisee if it's one-on-one, or the supervisor and the group if they're writing about group supervision. And in fact, what I found is that the supervisory relationships are many, and they multiply depending on the size of the group. And each one is really important in terms of nurturing. So if I were to have a group of 6, which in and of itself is interesting language, isn't it, about how we talk about groups? Typically, we talk about it in terms of this number of coaches in the group or the number of supervisees in the group. So this would be a group of 6 with the supervisor at the center. And I always think about it as a group of 7, because I always think about myself as a group member. But that's not how the literature is developed. And what I found is in these 5 groups, every relationship made a difference in the ability of the group to do, to self-disclose, to learn, to practice, to be present, to uncover their stories. And so when I think about our role as leader, as supervisor, it's not only intentionally crafting our relationship with each of the 6 and with the group, but it's helping each member of the group cultivate their relationships with each other. So for example, in the organization I do most of my supervision with, we have a procedure where you sign up for 10 supervision sessions over a year with the supervisor, and you commit to a peer learning call at the 2-week mark between the sessions with the supervisor to encourage and engage the coaches in creating those bonds and those deeper relationships with each other. This is a little bit different, of course, than many people who believe that the supervisor and the coaches should meet as a group and only as a group. I found that the peer learning calls are incredibly valuable, and there are appropriate times for one-on-one dialogue with me and a supervisee, independent of the group. And then sometimes we go back and share it with the group, and sometimes we don't. An example of that would be if a coach, and if I sense a coach has moved into shame in the session and is still stirred up at the end of the session, I may reach out to them, or they may reach out to me, and we may work it, and then we decide together whether we take it back to the group. But I have found that that's been really essential in cultivating the relationships. And for many supervisors, that's a very controversial statement. And I'd love to hear from you if it is for you as well. This is the kind of environment I think we're all really interested in creating for our groups. This is a quote from one of the participants. Isn't this what we want, right? In a group that's effective, in a group where the relationships exist as well as the safe and trusted container, that this is how they are in the group. And you'll see it, I'll share it soon, but just a footnote here. This doesn't mean necessarily warm and fuzzy. I have found that challenge is a really important part of creating this safe and trusted space. And one of the things that in cultivating these relationships that really came up was the members of the group and the supervisor, when they had the shared purpose of learning and development with each other, it made a huge difference in the cultivation of the relationship. So I now make the shared purpose, which I think is assumed, right? We're all coming to supervision for learning and development. But I spend a lot more time in my early sessions reinforcing and inviting them to share purpose. because it has really significantly shifted the people's ability to develop those relationships. And I don't know if you know Coyle's book, Culture Code, but this is a quote from him, I think, that captures a lot about the shared purpose. And he says that, you know, does belonging happen from the inside or the outside? And that, I think that's a glorious topic we could spend all morning on. But his take on it is we need these cues from each other. And this again is about the shared purpose. So if I pause here, let me get out of stop share for a minute. Whoops. So this is around the relationship piece. This is how important it is to cultivate the multiplicity of relationships in the group, how important it is sometimes to do repair outside the group, sometimes not. And the explicit articulation within the groups of their shared purpose. So I'm just wondering, and Damien, if you'd be willing to pop people into groups of 3, give or take, I wonder what is just coming up from you, just as you think about this piece, the importance of supervisory relationships and how do you cultivate them with your supervisees? And any comments before we break into the breakout groups? We'll go for maybe 8 minutes. Good. All right, Damien, you want to pop us in?
Include you in one of the groups if you want to do that, or would you want to stay in this room?
I'll jump in. That'd be great. Okay. Thanks. Take 30 seconds and post anything in the chat, and then after that 30 seconds, if anybody wants to come in and just share anything before we go on to the second, that would be great. But anything on your mind from that dip into the breakout rooms?
I think, Kathryn, that Michelle posted in the chat room. I don't know if you get to see it because sometimes when you have the presentation, it's difficult to see, but he shared all of the research, all of the doctoral research work. So for people, if they're interested in copy and paste, or you can save the chat at the end of the session with all of these resources.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle, very much for that. Allison Hodge was my supervisor, and when I was going through my training, and she had just completed her thesis when I started working with her, and she's a big part of why I got excited about doing the doctorate. Yeah. Yeah. So anything come up for you in the breakout sessions that you want to share before we go on?
Well, I mean, the fact is that when we are in the group, when the group behaves differently. I mean, it's very obvious in, for instance, team coaching. Teams very often says, when you are here, we have no conflict, and when we are back in our enterprise, again we have conflict. So we cannot live without you. So I wonder if it's the same in supervision, is that when we are in the group, maybe we are too close, maybe they cannot, in fact, live without us. So we have to be out of the group so they can be independent again.
Yeah, it's such a good question, Michelle, isn't it? And where I go is, how do we invite and articulate that with the group? How do we invite them? How do we pause the group and say, what aren't you saying? And what is that about? And what does that tell you about it? And even if they don't share it in the moment, I think that, and conflict's an interesting word, but I think that if we're going to really open possibility in small groups and really look at ourselves and our stories and how we make meaning in the world, we need people around us who are going to be courteous and respectful, but not withhold where they're seeing a contradiction or where they see meaning differently. So I think that's a huge part of inviting that in. I don't have any magic bullet from the research, but I think it's a really important point. All right, anything else? We'll go on to looking at facilitation. All right, let's go back.
People are shy today. What? like maybe you want to share in the chat room. Okay, I'm seeing here that Kathryn, some people are writing down some comments in the chat room.
Yeah, and I'm not following them, so thank you, Damien.
Okay.
Yeah, there are power games for sure. I'll tell you what, let me go on to this next piece since we've got just about 30 minutes left. And then I'll not go into a breakout session. I'll read the chats and respond to them when we come back. How's that?
Sounds good. Okay.
So facilitation, of course, is about contracting. How are we going to facilitate the groups? And for me, this is all co-creation. Level one, the initial design, of course, is our preferences, what we want in the group. Who do we want in the group? How many times do we want to meet? What's the pricing, right? All that administrative stuff. And it's interesting because I know a number of supervisors who select group members, who interview and select group members. In my practice and in the 5 groups that were in the research, they either sign up to a particular date and time and supervisor, or they self-form a group because they know each other, they work together, they were in training together, whatever their relationships are, and they come to us. So in these groups, there's no supervisor selection of group membership. And so the initial design here is really about administrative and how many times we meet and the commitment to peer learning calls, not who's in the group. But the level 2 and level 3 for me are the heart of how do we want to work as a group? How do we want to co-inquire? How do we want, and what do we want to bring for consideration within the group? One of the things that came out of these groups, and I keep referencing them because I have permission to share these stories because they were part of the research, is that the initial frame, even for the longer term groups, was that we bring issues, struggle, themes to supervision to look at, consider, try to improve our coaching practice. And what we discovered in the process was that this is a really important place to bring moments of feeling and flow, moments of discovery by the client, moments where we and the client feel like something very special happened. And look at it with the same level of inquiry as we do when we're stuck with a client or struggling with a client or trying to resource ourselves, to begin to identify and own the mastery that we're developing. And I use mastery very carefully because I think it's a lifelong journey. I don't think we ever get there. But having a coach come in and talk about and discover that how they were different with this client, their ability to be present to this client, recognizes and lets them see how much they've come in the last several months in terms of being able to be present with their clients is a really key important piece of the contracting, and that they will bring those kinds of sessions in. And in the groups, it was much harder for them to bring in their successful, what they've perceived as successful interactions than it was their struggle. So sometimes with groups, we stay within a particular structure. In some of these groups, we did a lot of live action coaching, which means that they would come into the room and say, here's my struggle with this client. I want to play the role of the client and have somebody coach me for 15 or 20 minutes and then debrief what I've learned about myself with this client. Or there's 7 or 8 ways of doing live action coaching, for example. There's, of course, some groups that required the case write-up in advance, some groups that didn't. But it's working with the groups to set up, how do we want to be overall in coming in? And then the level 3 is, it's the, right, of course, we're all permission-based. We are so about in the moment, what shall we do as a group? What rituals, what experimentation? And one of the things that I found is that there's a really big place for experimentation and mixing up the process at times with the permission of the group to do so. So I do a lot of initial contracting, then I'll contract with them through the sessions. And a couple of the contracting items in level 3 is, and I'm sure most of us do this, is when the presenting coach, when we've done the co-inquiry with them, and I ask them what they're sitting with or stirred up about or taking at the end of their time in the group, I then ask each of the other coaches, what are they taking for themselves for their own practice, for their own relationship with their clients? But of course, that's contracted for in the session. So the contracting levels, and if you know Bridget Proctor's work on contracting, she has 5 levels, and I cover the other 2 in the section that's coming. But what was so true here is this is an ongoing moment-to-moment negotiation, and it is done mutually. None of my groups run the same. Depends on what they want and what they learn about themselves, particularly over the years. And what I found in all the groups that came out of the cultivation of the relationships and translated into the contracting were these qualities. That if we could, through our relationships and co-contracting and facilitation of the group, bring these to the foreground, expansive acceptance, which is about whatever comes in, who's there, who's not there, who's prepared, who's not prepared, who's present, who's discombobulated, whatever's happening with the technology. That expansive acceptance among us, cultivating it among the coaches, was really, really important, as was the ability to be in empathic resonance and appreciate what each other did. In all the groups, there was such verbal gratitude for the coaches bringing to the group what they brought, for their inquiry with each other, for what the supervisor brought. Challenge and possibilities, of course, is huge. I'd mentioned it earlier. In one of the groups, one of the coaches, this was a group that was in their 3rd year of meeting together. And one of the coaches in the group had been unable to see herself, observe herself, which of course is a big part of what we do, is help the coaches actually observe themselves. And she, in one of the sessions, said, oh my gosh, I have just realized, so this is her 3rd year with this group, I have just realized that you all do this in the session And I always immediately go to tell the coach what they should have done. So this was a very important moment for her. And she said, how is that for the group? And in that moment, all of us having been singed a bit, burnt a bit by her reactivity in the prior years, the group immediately jumped in and said, we need all sorts of different personalities, all sorts of different ways of being. We're really glad you do that. It's no issue. And I didn't, it was a big learning for me. I didn't pause the group and say, wait, let's look at what's happening here. This is the first time she's offered this observation. What is there more to share than just the reinforcement that it's okay to be different? And I didn't. And my sense, both in the session, watching the recording later, and the more I think about it, is in that moment, our inability to truthfully respond to her about it lessened the sense of safety and trust in the room. The inability to tell the truth I use very loosely, not the truth, but to tell what was true for us when she jumped in with the answer and how it was not useful in most situations, lessened for that session the sense of safety in the group. So it's really a key piece of the findings. Experimentation, as I mentioned earlier, it brings a lot of energy and liveliness, and there's a number of ways to do it. And shared vulnerability. In one of the groups, some of the coaches had retired, but they stayed in the group. And what they found was that the lack of shared vulnerability, most of the cases were brought by 3 of the members, 4 of the members were retired. There was a lack of shared vulnerability. So it raises a really interesting membership question for us as a community. The other thing is, in one of the groups, for a bunch of reasons, but one of the groups I was supervising in the research, they were all in significant life challenge at the moment, forced retirement, a spouse with a cancer diagnosis waiting for their own biopsy results, whatever it was. They were all in this very difficult, under-resourced place, and came saying, we're here, we want to be here, but we don't have anything because there's so much else on our mind. And I said, because I'd been reading about it in the clinical psych literature, I said, well, would you all supervise me? I'm stuck with a coaching client. And the immediate response in the group was, what? Why did we hire you as a supervisor if you get stuck with clients? You're supposed to be the master coach. Which generated this lovely, rich discussion about what is mastery. And is it really true that as humans, we would never be stuck? And what were their expectations of me, right? And then I shared my case with them, and they supervised me, which reinforced their co-supervising skills and illuminated my case for me. But that shared vulnerability, that session, even today, so that was 2017, 2018, even today, so that group must be what, 5 or 6 years in now, they go back to that moment as pivotal in their willingness to bring all of themselves and all the success and ickiness, because we had this shared vulnerability, because I too got stuck. So I contract a course around taking my work to supervision, but I often come back and say, I was really thinking about our session from last time, and I took it to supervision, and here's what I discovered. And it's that shared vulnerability as part of the creation of the relationships and the facilitation that needs to be cultivated and contracted for. So Damien, if you can pop us again into groups for just a few minutes, and I just won't join the room because I want to read the chat, but just anything that stirred up for you around how you facilitate and how you organize your groups. It might just, or what came up in what I shared.
So how long, and do you want the same groups or different ones?
Let's do the same groups.
How long?
And let's do 7 minutes. That'd be great. Thank you, Damien. Great, welcome back. Do you want to take just 15, 30 seconds to put anything in chat that's coming up for you? And then see if you want to add anything. I was just reading the comments, as you know, while you were away, and it was really useful.
So, while we're waiting for people to write that down, do you want to hear a couple of people to share?
Would love that. Yeah.
Any volunteers?
Yeah, Michelle, vulnerability, shame too, varies by culture tremendously. Yeah.
We were talking, Kathryn, in my trial was the importance of the relationship that you talked at the beginning, like one is related to the other one, that to the extent that you have a good foundation and there is an effective relationship and trust and safety, you can take more risks about how vulnerable you are. And even in facilitation, we were talking that it doesn't matter how much experience you have. As human beings, we are always going to be missing something. So to embrace that no matter what, we may not be able to see something happening. So that's the reason why it's so important to be able to say what you said before. Okay, I was thinking about it and coming back. So we don't need to have all of the answers in the moment. But at the same time, if we let go and we keep moving like nothing happened after somebody says something, we may lose the trust from the participants.
Yeah, absolutely, Damon. If I could add to that a couple of things. One is sometimes the group isn't quite ready. So I had a group where something happened and I didn't realize until they were checking out, and each one of them was reassuring the coach. And I knew something had gone awry. And in our groups, it's more typical than not to record all the time. And so I've listened to hundreds of hours of my sessions, but I most often typically have recordings to go back to. And so I was stirred up and I went to the group, took it to supervision, went to the group the next month and said, I took this to supervision, shall we talk about it? And they said, nope, 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 nope. So it happened in January, that was February. March, I went back and said, I'm still thinking about that January session. I wonder if we could have a conversation about it. Nope, 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 nope. So that tells you how lasting the breach was, yeah? In April, I raised it again at the beginning, and one of the coaches said, I'm so glad you raised it. I want to talk about it. And the group said, why don't you two go talk about it and come back and tell us what happened? Because it was between this woman and me, this coach and me. And we talked about it for a while. Why was the group feeling that way? And then, so she and I went to the recording, and then we met. We were both really surprised that the recording wasn't at all what we remembered. We figured out some things. We went back to the group, and one of the things that we shared with the group was what I had realized is when I'm triggered in some situations, I start using the name of the coach in every other sentence. Well, Sally, but what about this, Sally? And have you thought about this, Sally? And so it became this huge learning for me that if I start using the name of the coach, I know and the group knows. It's time to stop, pause, find my presence, figure out what the heck's going on for me, because I'm unaware of it in the moment. So there's so much juicy learning here. And the other thing is just recordings. I love them. I mean, love is a word that I use intentionally. I learn so much every time I watch myself in a group. And the fact that some of my groups let me record and they also watch it, either because they want to go back and see what the group did with them in their presenting case because they weren't taking notes because they were so in it, or they want to go back and watch it before they meet with a client in the next session. And some groups, of course, don't record. So, yeah, Keith.
So Kathryn, you mentioned earlier that the groups you've been doing, you don't interview people ahead of time. The groups were put together. So I'm curious, under the role of facilitator, when you talk about these 6 qualities, how do these, do these 6 qualities get discussed, or you as the supervisor, you're simply looking for these to get co-created?
Well, so if the coaches coming to supervision, which is often the case here, have not been in supervision before, it doesn't make any sense to them. They have no context in which to start with the conversation. So I notice and reinforce them, I role model them, but the 3rd, 4th, 5th session, when we're starting to check in more about our process, I will often pause and share with them different pieces of supervision. And sometimes it's 1 or 2 of those qualities. Often it's expansive acceptance, and using the quote from Ram Dass's teacher, "Don't you see it's all perfect?" To accept our imperfections is often where I start, or the gratitude piece. And then sometime during the first year, I'll begin to share with them what the possibilities are for practice, for learning, for experimentation within the group. But coaches new to supervision, particularly experienced coaches new to supervision, need to experience it before we can really start to co-create. Not exclusively, but yeah, thank you for that. All right, let me, we've got about 7 minutes left. So let me go here for a minute. So supervisory relationships are most important, but if you look at Bridget Proctor's group, she would say our being the guardians of reflective practice is, of course, vital. That is, in fact, why we're there, is our mission. And Isaac's from Dialogue, which I'm sure you've all read, and Proctor's book on group supervision. It's how do we cultivate the space for reflective practice? And so I think about it, there's the presenting coach, of course, and what they're noticing and sharing, and the group members, and how we help the group inquire and learn ultimately to be. In my groups, I facilitate so that we're co-inquirers, but that's a learning process for new group members. Opening these possibilities and perspectives, and designing future actions and experiments, and of course challenging, and helping them, most importantly, cultivate their ability to observe their self. These are the things that I'm really aware of, alert to, reinforcing, inviting, cultivating within the session. And then before, in, and post session. So for example, pre-session reflection is a really important piece of the supervision experience. How do we pause, notice, decide what we want to bring, what's stirring for us? I send, a few days in advance, I send a reflection question to the group. Most groups, not all groups, some groups don't want it. They do pre-session differently, but just to begin to get the coach to pause. So it might be a simple question like, what are you noticing about your curiosity? What do you know that shuts it down in sessions? Or what are you noticing about how you are with the clients you really want to work with? And how is that slightly different from the clients you're hoping cancel? So sometimes the reflection question resonates, sometimes it doesn't. Some groups want it, some groups don't. But again, it's how are we building their capacity for reflective practice? And then the post-session reflections, what do they do afterwards? How do we support, encourage, invite them to capture? And then what are they doing to experiment and integrate their learnings? So we talk about that too. We invite at times conversations around, so what are you doing, if anything, differently with your clients? What are you experimenting with? What are you integrating? And that's a lot about catching up with their own development. And so I think about guardian of reflective practice as not only what's happening in the session, which of course is vital, but how we help them develop so that it is an ongoing regular practice. And I do have some references for you, so I can send these out if you like, but let me pause there. So we have just a few minutes before my commitment to Lily. Anything that stirred up for you. I know it's been a lot in a short period of time, but I hope some of it's been useful. What would you like to say? Anything provocative or anything resonant or anything?
I have a question, if you don't mind my asking.
Yeah, sure, Maureen.
Just thinking about a group I have, I actually did interview them, and I'm hearing that you don't interview them. Yet I found myself in a group where some were extremely transactional coaches, and particularly one is transformational. And transference, countertransfer, I won't go in here, but I'm just wondering, how do I bring that to the surface? Because the transactional is all about accountability, performance coaching, actions. And, you know, I just, so I'm shivering in my shoes. Any advice?
Oh yeah, love it. Just love it.
If you want provocation, I can do it. So
yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple of things there. I think it's a very interesting question about how do we sort our groups, right? And I think if I could interview, I would sort actively coaching versus emerging versus retired or stepping away. I think I would actively sort to the extent I could tell where they are developmentally, but that's, you know, that's a crapshoot, if you'll forgive the language. But for me, I think there's so much to learn in a group that is, as you describe, because you know those coaches are each having a reaction to each other. And that informs not only how they are in the group, but it so richly informs how they work with clients who are similar to their colleagues. And so I think the gentle holding and inviting a conversation about it. Hey, let's just pause. What did we just notice about how each of us responded to the presenting coach? And what does that offer or illuminate about how we respond when we ask the client what's their focus for today? And they give us something and we have a much better idea for them. Or they give us something and we're able to be with them and open up with them. So yeah, I think it's, to your point, Maureen, I think it's one of the more challenging groups, but I lean into it from, oh my God, what can we learn? How exciting. But I love resistance, so you should know that too. But what can we learn?
Same here.
I saw another hand up, I think.
It was me.
Kimberly, yeah.
I just wanted to say, what an incredible learning process. I'm new, I'm coming into group supervision, and everything I'm learning in terms of working with the group is just expanding my own sense of awareness and learning and what's possible. So it's really exciting. And thank you for everything you've shared.
You're welcome, Kimberly. Well, yeah, because, you know, it is all about us ultimately, isn't it? As Edna Murdoch says, who we are is how we coach, who we are is how we supervise, who we are is how we do everything in the world. Yeah, so learning about ourselves. Yeah, Leanne, jump in.
Oh, I just wanted to really appreciate your commitment to reflection and to holding strong and firm around that, and everything is something. And I really got that. And it reminds me sometimes I can let myself off the hook. And I really appreciated like keeping yourself there and keeping yourself in those difficult conversations and keeping yourself reflecting and growing and learning. So thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, thank you. Eva, jump in.
Hi, Kathryn. So yeah, I would pick up on what Leanne just said. It's really amazing how brave you are. And I'm sitting here with a reflection. Oh gosh, will I record myself now with a group? Takes guts. So thank you. That is very provocative, Kathryn.
The more you do it, the easier it gets. I'm now literally hundreds of hours in, and I just can't wait to look at the recordings. That was not how I started. Trust me. Yeah, but we have these recordings in the data from the research. So we have actually what happens in the sessions, not just the coaches, you know, which can be very useful to interview or talk about after the fact. But I have 47 hours of actual supervision sessions in the data, and it's glorious. We're out of time. I have so appreciated being here. Kudos and thanks to Damien and Lily again, and for all of you for coming. And you know where to find me. So I'd be delighted to continue the dialogue in any way that was useful for you. And Michelle, thank you again for bringing the list of the research and supervision, because it's really important. Good.
Thank you, Kathryn. That was great. And we hope to see you again in the future in some of these meetings. You know, this is the America Supervisor Network. It's great to have you here today. I hope that you can keep participating in the future. And also, Kathryn is one of the leaders of the new ICF Community of Practice on Coaching Supervision. So we also want to invite people to join. When is, Kathryn, the next session? Do you remember?
Yes, it is. Let me look at the calendar. September 20th. Yeah, September 20th, 10 a.m. Pacific. Yeah, 10 a.m. Pacific.
Okay, so I want people to pay attention to that opportunity. Next month, we have Natalia de Esteban Ubieda. She is from Spain, but lives in the UK. And she's also going to share her research on the development of supervisors.
Yeah, it's great research. It's great stuff.
I had the opportunity to have her presenting on the research for the Spanish-speaking network, and it was very interesting. So I hope that you can make it. And she will, and I put in the chat room the description of what she wrote about it, what she's going to be doing next month. And also for people who are available next week on Tuesday evening, Pacific Standard Time, we are going to repeat the session we had last month on diversity and inclusion in coaching supervision. That session is recorded, and you can access always all of our recording through our website, the America Coaching Supervision website. And this session is also going to be available there. And Sunny is going to be doing the same session she did last month for this network, for the Asian Supervisor Network, next week on Tuesday evening, if you are available and want to join us. Also, for people who are interested, we have the yearly Coaching Supervision Conference. And next year is going to be 28, 29, and 30th of April in Hawaii. And the call for proposals is coming up in a couple of weeks. So pay attention to that. We would love everybody who is here to consider participating and presenting. So thank you again, Kathryn. Thanks, everybody. And looking forward to seeing you in the next events and activities. See you soon. Take care.
Bye.